I'm going to read just a tiny excerpt from this book, which Brett has mentioned, The Wuhan Cover Up and the Terrifying Bioweapons Arms Race by Bobby Kennedy, his latest. By 100 pages in, which is when this chapter is, Kennedy has established that throughout the 20th century, bioweapons development had been accelerating in many of the world's countries, often under the guise of life science. And he makes good fun of the concept, the naming of these life scientists who are mostly involved in, as he says, death science.
End of life science
and death science, who are doing vaccine development and research to defend against the promised coming plagues. But one of the well-supported contentions in the book is that, to a startling extent, our plagues and epidemics are self-inflicted wounds. Not entirely, of course, but we have life scientists in labs to blame, often not viruses and other pathogens that evolved entirely by natural selection, right? And so long-time listeners and viewers will remember that early in COVID, one of the first places that we were actively disagreeing with the mainstream narrative was, that's not going to be zoonotic. Like that's going to have emerged from a lab. And, we went through a lot of reasons, and you also separately, with a number of guests, went through a bunch of the evidence for why this was very unlikely to be a naturally occurring virus. Remember that anyone at that point, and it's still not settled, but increasingly, if you ask people privately, what do you think? People are like, yeah, it probably came from a lab, right? And you still can't really say that in official places, but back in 2020, if you said that, you were a conspiracy theorist, and you got laid out as a crank for saying such a thing.
Well, wait, I want to add one thing before you go.
Yeah.
Something interesting is up on this topic. I believe that we had closed in on a state the correct way that things get scientifically settled. I believe that we had a vigorous debate and that we had won it. And was it nailed to a fairly well? Maybe not, but very close.
Yeah,
hold on.
I disagree. And I want to come back to this when I've gotten through more of the book, but there's some stuff going on at Rutgers between two of the camps that is remarkable. And it suggests that actually the people on we're creating these things, whether you, the world likes it or not, side of things, had never given up. And
oh, no. Giving up is not it. Mm-hmm. There's a huge incentive to not give up. They never gave up, and they probably will never give up. But the point is, there may be adherents to Lysenkoism out there, but it's settled. Now, my point is, settled is supposed to actually have a consequence if you get there through vigorous debate. And what happened is somebody decided on a surge where they were going to take something that people had reached a consensus about in a natural way, and they were going to unsettle it.
I don't think that's what happened, but let's just read a little bit from this chapter 17 of, again, The Wuhan Cover Up by Bobby Kennedy. He's established that the legal immunities were provided by the Patriot Act, but the Pentagon and CIA remained reluctant to publicly engage in bioweapons development. They may have worried that the Patriot Act loopholes would not survive judicial scrutiny. Violations of the Geneva Protocol were capital crimes. Following Shiro Ishii's model, they began funneling massive biodefense funding to the National Institutes of Health to do bioweapons research under the guise of vaccine development. And of course, the NIH, as everyone came to understand early in 2020, is the umbrella funder in the U.S. That includes the NIAID, the National Institutes for the... what does it even stand for? Infectious allergies and infectious diseases, of which Fauci has been the lead for a very long time, since before AIDS. In keeping with this strategy, Vice President Cheney moved to consolidate federal biodefense research programs, then siloed in numerous departments and agencies into a single entity within Anthony Fauci's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. In essence, they made Tony Fauci the new bioweapons czar. Dr. Fauci had fortuitously made his bones with a bioweapons set 20 months earlier. Gain-of-function genesis. In February 2020, long before the more innocuous term gain-of-function entered the popular nomenclature, Dr. Fauci inaugurated the unregulated wildcat era of dual-use science by funding a foreboding experiment by Lily Kuo and a team at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. So again, dual-use, which he hasn't defined here, is yeah, this is good. This is good for us. We want to know. And also this is going to be useful over in bioweapons space. In the resultant study titled Retargeting of Coronavirus by Substitution of the Spike Glycoprotein Ectodomain, Crossing the Host Cell Species Barrier, the researchers announced that they had removed a spike protein from a mouse coronavirus and implanted a feline coronavirus spike. Virologists describe such hybridized viruses as chimeric, after the Greek monster that was part lion, part goat, and part serpent. So that research that Kennedy is discussing there is here. You can show my screen. This is, again, research published in the Journal of Virology in February 2000, funded by Fauci's NIAID, called, again, Retargeting of Coronavirus by Substitution of the Spike Glycoprotein Ectodomain, Crossing the Host Cell Species Barrier. And here's just a couple of brief excerpts from the abstract and the introduction. Coronaviruses generally have a narrow host range, infecting one or just a few species. Using targeted RNA recombination, we constructed a mutant of the coronavirus mouse hepatitis virus, MHV, in which the ectodomain of the spike glycoprotein, S, was replaced with a highly divergent ectodomain of the S protein of feline infectious peritonitis virus. The resulting chimeric virus, designated F-MHV, acquired the ability to infect feline cells and simultaneously lost the ability to infect murine cells in tissue culture. One more thing. The family Coronaviridae contains the causative agents of a number of significant respiratory and enteric diseases affecting humans, other mammals, and birds. One of the hallmarks of this family is that most of its members exhibit a very strong degree of host species specificity, the molecular basis of which is thought to reside in the particularity of the interactions of individual viruses with their corresponding host cell receptors. 20 years before SARS-CoV-2 shows up on the scene, and anyone who suggests that this has all the hallmarks of something that was created that was chimerized in a lab as opposed to entirely the result of natural selection in the field, 20 years before that, Fauci funded work that first demonstrated that you could actually move the spike from one coronavirus onto another, knowing that the Coronaviridae, the family of viruses that is the coronaviruses, tend to have specifically and notably high host specificity and don't tend to be able to infect multiple species of hosts. 20 years earlier.
Yeah. I will say I've read that whole book. It's quite a painful read. All of the stuff that you would think we would know about what we've been doing bioweapons-wise is overwhelming. You know, the history of the bioweapons program, its relationship to very significantly Japanese bioweapons research from the World War II era is jaw-dropping. And the number of, one has the sense, few people are going to read this book. It's a tough read. It's a technical read.
Right.
But it is, if you know what's in that book, this is a slam dunk. And what we don't understand in the public is that when you look at Anthony Fauci, you're looking at a weapons guy.
Yes.
As a weapons guy, the whole story of COVID makes a great deal more sense, right? Let's assume it was an accidental leak. Nonetheless, what were they doing in the lab and why? How did they end up with such a virus in the lab and why? Is a question that has a very uncomfortable answer. So anyway, I do recommend, if it's your kind of read, that you do pick it up. It's tough, but well worth it. But the problem is that the public, which knows nothing of this, is still confused, and that's the battleground. Anybody who read this book would be shocked at how much there is to say about the particular details of the experiments that were being run, the grant proposals that were filed, the program to which they belonged, the nature of Fauci's domain. But in any case, yeah, it's stunning. It's all there, right? Most of this stuff was published, and putting the pieces together and understanding what they were doing is not as hard as people make it out to be if you have access. So mostly a lot of smoke is being thrown up, so we can't tell.